Okay. Alrighty. Let's jump in here. Oh. Okay. Alrighty. So we were talking on Wednesday, which felt like Monday, and today is Friday, which feels like Friday. About survey design. So we're going to keep doing that. Before I jump in, any questions about anything? The mini lab number 2. Other questions you might have? No? All right, let's keep going then. Okay. All right, so we ended off here, right? We were talking about some do's and don'ts when it comes to survey design, and we ended off talking about, make sure you have good symmetry in your questions, right? So if you're asking how satisfied are you, very good obviously doesn't make sense. And you want balanced answer sets, right? So you don't want things weighted too far in the, say, positive direction if you look at that answer set. Okay. Other rules. Don't overstretch people's memories, right? So don't expect people to recall what they've done or observed in detail. So especially things that might be hard to reconstruct, right? So, I mean, if there's a technical way of accessing something, you could potentially do that. I've seen some people propose that, say, for hours spent on social media, people use the kind of tracking functions built into iOS and Android to look at how much time you spent in Instagram, for instance. So if there's a technical way to do that, absolutely you can ask that question. But if it's like, how many hours did you spend online per week, that might be really difficult for people to remember, right? And the longer you push that back, if you ask how much time did you spend online 3 weeks ago, it's going to get harder and harder for people to remember. Now, sometimes, I think we have this elsewhere. Come on. You can do things like, if you want to know about media consumption habits or exercise habits, you can get people to do a diary. Now, the diary will tend to be forward-looking, right? So it's like, I'm going to ask you to participate in this, and I want you to tell me how much time you spent watching television for the next 3 weeks, right? So that they're then actively kind of tracking their media consumption. And you could do this with anything, right? You could do this with hours spent at a bar, hours exercising, what kind of exercises they did, what kind of media they consumed, all of these sorts of things. But then you're not stretching people's memories, right? You have to ask the question differently. If you ask, how much television have you watched in the last 6 months, right? People are going to have a difficult time answering your question, right? So just carefully consider, if you want to know about something that might be hard for people to remember, that memory is a very, very flawed kind of process. And maybe I'll illustrate it with a kind of an anecdote that comes out of psychology. So back in the ancient days, when technology was scarcely more advanced than rubbing 2 sticks together, 2001. Obviously, September 11th, 2001, right? There was the attacks in New York. And one thing that the next day a psychology professor did was he had a bunch of students write down their recollection of the events of 9/11. And then he brought them back a year later and handed them a sealed envelope with their recollection in it. And it was about half of them that looked at it and said, I didn't write this, because their memory of the events had so fundamentally shifted in a year as to what had happened. So that's sort of anecdotal evidence, but it suggests, and we know this about memory, people are constantly kind of rewriting their memory. Memory changes to match the present. There's all sorts of things that happen. So don't overstretch people's memories, and don't trust people's memories either, because people's memories inherently are going to be wrong. The more, things are memory, the more you open it up to social desirability bias, right? Oh yeah, I work out 6 times a week. Of course I do, right? Just because, you open it up to all sorts of problems. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Carefully consider don't know or neutral options. This is one, I know a lot of pollsters disagree with this sort of advice, but there are definite disadvantages to a don't know option. And I think in general, I sort of think this is the right way to go. And sometimes the don't know drives me absolutely crazy, because you look at you look at some polling, right? For instance, I just was looking at some kind of religious landscape polling that just came out today, and religious identity questions. And so, it's like, oh, okay, Christian, Catholic, Protestant, atheist, agnostic, nothing in particular, and don't know. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't know? Obviously you should know. But sometimes don't know is also a proxy for I don't want to answer your question. I feel uncomfortable. I feel like there might be a social desirability bias that I don't want to expose, right? Famously, there are some topics that if you include a don't know, the don't know will be, a majority of the participants, because the topics are so awkward. Pornography use, for example, gets a really high percentage of don't know, right? Like how many hours a week do you spend viewing pornography? Don't know. What, you can't count that high, or you don't want to say, right? So generally speaking, don't know is often a proxy for other things in people's minds. It's a sort of, some people like to have it for an escape hatch on a question, right? So if your participant doesn't feel comfortable answering, they can go with don't know. I feel the same way about prefer not to answer. Sometimes I honestly think you should leave this out and just force people to answer a question. Generally it's like you don't want to force people to answer a question. Increasingly with online, you could have a skip option if you think that's useful. But again, I think I would use it. I would tend not to want to use it. Sometimes you can use it as a filter question, right? Or as part of a filter question or a sorting question. So, if you really want people who know about a specific topic, right? Who, have a really strong, you want to make sure that you're getting people who know a lot about politics. You could ask them a sort of filtering question, like, what's your opinion of Bill C-21, right? And if they're like, don't know, that person's probably not going to be good in the rest of your political poll, because if they don't know about one of the premier pieces of legislation in Canada, they're not going to know about a lot of your other issues. So you can just sort of like let them out or exit them from your sample there. But even then, right, there's other, I think, better filter questions. So carefully, like, you can use it. It's not an absolute no, but anywhere where you think someone might use it as an escape hatch, just know that you're going to get then this black box of information that doesn't make sense, right? And it could be as high as like 10, 15% sometimes, because you don't know why they're saying, I don't know. Especially on something like religious identity, like, how is it they don't know, right? Something that people should just kind of intuit, they don't know, or political party identification. You could have none, which would make a lot more sense than don't know. So anyway, I would consider leaving that off in general. Okay. So question order. This is probably, like, for the purpose of this course, I would say question order, because I think at most for the major lab, you can be writing 10, 15 survey questions. And so you wouldn't have to think of question order as much. But if you ever, are doing original research at a the honors level, at a master's or PhD level, this is definitely something that matters. Okay, generally speaking, the survey should be the same for everyone. It shouldn't be randomly shuffled, mostly because you want to avoid the possibility of order effects, right? Like if you ask questions in a different order, what would this, would that change how people answer? Or sometimes it changes how people answer, right? If you ask a provocative question before another one, if you have everyone answer, you'll say that you have the same kind of order effects everywhere. So obviously the only exception is if you're testing for order effects, right? So if you want to find out, and I would say probably 90% of the time, if you're testing for order effects, you're probably at the pilot stage, right? You might see this in psychology too, in a questionnaire in psychology where they're wanting to see, how being asked this question before this question might affect the answer to one or the other. But in sociology, I would say generally order effects, you're testing at the pilot stage to see, if I ask about this issue before this one, is it going to skew how people answer it? And then you can play with your order of questions. Now, honestly, like if you're at this level, you're probably like PhD, postdoc, career researcher, where you're thinking about the structure of your research question or your questionnaires at this level. You're well beyond anything I've ever done. And probably ever will do. So, you would be here, you'll be thinking back to that quaint class you had with that guy who knew a little bit of something about, survey design, I guess. Because you'll have exceeded me by 1,000 times. The teacher will have become the master at that point. So, generally speaking, this is very, very high level, right? You don't have to worry about this where you're at. And again, if you're piloting for order of effects, you're at an incredibly high level of research, and I salute future you for your great accomplishments. Okay. Generally, your earlier questions, always with that, should be related to your research topic. And again, some of this is retention. You want to make sure that whatever you said you were doing in your research, right? And if you're doing it at an academic level, you're going to have your consent letter and information letter before someone jumps into your survey. Again, I'm assuming you're doing it online. So you should hit some of those questions first, right? Because people are going to be expecting certain things. And if all of a sudden you start asking them about, you said you were bringing them in to talk about their political leanings, but then you start asking them how many pets they have, people are going to be confused. And again, this is possibly like, am I doing the right survey? Are these people drunk? What the hell is going on? You can get people exiting, and you want to make sure people get through the harder stuff first and the stuff that's relevant first, and then kind of ease them into like really easy questions at the end. Yeah, questions likely to be of interest to the respondent should be asked early in the interview or questionnaire. Interview only if you were doing it, like a structured interview where you're running a survey in person or on the phone. You're inevitably, if you're doing this as a career, you might do a little bit of that, but you're probably doing stuff online more. So you want basically to put stuff early that's going to be interesting to the person. Why did they sign up for the survey? Put that first. Sensitive questions, right? Stuff that might potentially be kind of touchy or hot topics. You should probably put it well into your, when it says the schedule of questions is just the list of questions, not like the schedule, like what day of the week you're doing it. I only say that because one time it was for the second assignment, and I said, you need to give me your interview schedule, which is like the list of interview questions. And the person wrote, it was like, on Tuesday. I'm like, no, stop. Like, that is not, I understand what happened here. I was unclear with the language, but no, that's not what the schedule is, right? The schedule is the list of questions. And again, like I would say after the half, right? After 1/2, you should have your sensitive questions after the halfway mark, but probably before the 3/4 mark. The 4 never appeared. Come, my 4. There we go. Yeah, so but after the half, but before the 3/4 mark. So, I mean, there's a little bit of psychology built into this as well. But, you know, some questions might be upsetting to people, right? Have you ever been the victim of sexual assault? You know, have you ever been the victim of a crime? You know, all sorts of things you could think might be upsetting to people. There's a million topics. And part of it is, if they've already done half the survey, they're more likely to stay in because you know, what is it? The sunk theory or sunk cost. It's sunk cost theory, right? Where basically, well, I've already put in all of this time to do this survey. So even though, like, if that was like the 3rd question asked, I might exit. Now I've sunk all of this time in, so I might as well just finish, right? But then before 3/4 of the way, just because you don't want to put it right at the end, right? You want it to be a little bit of gap and then, you know, close out with some things that are a little bit simpler, a little bit easier to ask. In the kind of research sociologists do, the closing is almost always demographic. So they're super easy and non-controversial, right? Your age, income, number of children, are you married or unmarried, how they identify racially, you know, sex, gender, that kind of stuff. You tend to put right at the end because it's just, you cruise through them. They're super simple to answer. And those usually go in the bottom quarter. So yeah, sensitive questions after the half, but before 3/4, and then end off that last bit of your survey with demographics generally. And that's a pretty good kind of rule of thumb. Of course, as I've told you, you're not allowed to use demographic questions in this class because I consider it cheating or trying to be smarter than me, and I don't like that. So, but yeah, I mean, you always ask demographic questions because you want to know. And generally leaving them for the end is the best way to do it. I've seen people put them at the beginning, but I don't like it. And I just think they're such simple questions. You really want to ask them at the end when people are already kind of done with your survey. Okay, does that all make sense? Okay, I know you're like, these are a lot of rules. Survey writing is actually really, really hard to do well. To do it poorly is incredibly easy. To do it well is incredibly hard. And when you start to think of, like, you know, how do you operationalize things so that you can turn them into variables that you can ask survey questions about, it ends up being really, really hard. And there's lots of ways it can go wrong. Okay. Avoid provoking a response set. So I talked about response sets before, right? This is where someone just goes down the line and answers, you know, all B's, or, you know, they make a little pattern like abacadabra or something like that, right? The classic test writing strategy of idiots. I had a friend who swore, I could get 50% doing this. And I was like, in high school. And I'm like, try it. And he like scored like 16%. I'm like, yeah. It's not like you'll get 1/4 of the questions right. It's for each question you have a 1 in 4 chance of getting it correct. The statistics was not your strong suit, was it? Okay, anyway. Like, the odds actually get worse the more questions are on the exam. All right, anyway. Response sets, right? Often motivated by some things other than a person's actual feelings, like boredom. I'm bored of your survey and I want to finish it because I want my points, right? Or whatever. Boredom, anger, irritation, any number of other things, right? Even sometimes someone trying to fuck up your survey, right? Like this can happen sometimes. And we see this a lot more in academia now, where people see that you're from a university and they're like, oh, and like, especially if you're from a department of sociology, they're like, oh, you must be woke. I'm not woke. I'm going to mess with your survey by giving you random, stupid answers. Unfortunately, this is something we have to contend with in, you know, the present year and probably going forward. And so, you know, you want to avoid provoking response sets. If someone wants to mess with you, there's nothing you can do. But you don't want to set it up so things like really complicated answer sets, right? Really complicated, response sets, overly repetitive questions. Like, I know I've said, like, use Likert scales because they're really easy to understand. Sometimes overly repetitive questions can provoke a response set as well. I think of some that I've done, and it's like, I think for me, grid questions are always the ones that I don't like. Like, a grid question will be like, oh, so you'd have your answers here, right? So it'd be like, if I can actually draw on this thing, given the lag on it. So you would have, completely satisfied, satisfied, neither, dissatisfied, completely dissatisfied, right? And then you would have a bunch of questions, and the person would have to pick for each of these questions which one they want, right? It's called a grid, right? So basically you create a grid so that it could be like, the food at my restaurant, the atmosphere, the serving staff, and you would create like a list. Grid questions, I don't like them specifically, and I know lots of people that use them because they're really efficient, and especially on online stuff. You don't have to reload pages, and page reloads is another thing that tends to cause problems for people. But when you have a grid, right, people are more likely to go boom, 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 right? Just all the way down the grid because it's right there, right in front of you, and if you're not paying attention. So things like considering what, I know this is like deep into the weeds, considering what your survey looks like, right? Because sometimes the way it looks and the repetitiveness of this kind of setup, right, where I'm just repeating the same thing over and over again, can actually provoke a response set as well, right? And I've certainly been guilty of being like, I'm so tired. I just want my points. I want to finish this survey. For me, it's the marketing surveys that always get me like this, because it'll be like, if I clear this, and I know I'm telling you all sorts of stories out of school. It's like a list of brands, and it's like something like, is my opinion, very positive, neutral, somewhat negative, or negative, right? And there's like 25 brands on the list, and it's like, okay, Abercrombie. Wait, I have to think. What do I know about Abercrombie? Almost nothing. I guess I'll go neutral. All right, General Motors. Okay, I guess positive, like kind of. Toyota, yeah, very positive. You know what? Fuck this. And that's it. Because like, if I'm having to do this mental work between like 25 brands, or like, I don't know, you see this a lot in marketing. And again, I will write in the comment box, it's like, the grid design of your survey made me really want to kill myself, and possibly you. You really should consider asking these in a different way, because 100% by the time I got to like the 15th thing on your list of brands, I was done with your stupid grid. And honestly, I've seen pages where it's like 30 different things in a grid, and I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore, or I quit. And I'm now more vicious about quitting. But if I quit, I don't get to make snarky comments about survey design at the end. So, yeah. What does this say? Researchers using multi-item measures may include some items that logically call for opposite positions. Oh yeah, this is a great one. The one that you actually see now, which I see all the time, because again, I'm a nerd and I do surveys for fun. It'll be like, your opinion on Justin Trudeau, Pierre Poilievre, Jagmeet Singh, that French guy, I forget his name, Yves Blanchette, I think, maybe that's right. Elizabeth May, the undying zombie of Canadian politics. And then it's like, which one of these is an animal? So it's like rock, cat, dog, or no, rock, cat, tree, car. You're like, oh, cat, right? So again, it kind of breaks up, if you were like, hate them all, and then you're like, oh, a cat. That's a different answer. Oh, I have to put it there. Although you'd probably put that in, like the cat thing, like in the middle, so that people would have to stop and think about like, oh, Which one of these is an animal? Oh, it's a cat, right? Because it breaks up the flow mentally, where someone might have just been, oh, I switched pages. I don't know what this looks like now. Okay. It's nothing bad, it's just weird squiggles. It's breaking up flow, right? You can use things, and they can be random garbage questions that you actually don't really care about. And that seems to be kind of the trend in online survey design. It's like, ask a random question, like, which one of these is a color, right? Cat, dog, purple, jeans. Just so that people have to stop and kind of think, right? And it breaks up that flow where someone might go. So that's a good one. Those who persist in choosing answers regardless of the question, right? So if you have 3 of those kinds of like questions in it, and no matter what, they pick B, even though it makes no sense, you can automatically just kind of select in like Stata or SPSS or R and be like, okay, anything that looks like that answered these questions consistent with X% of the other questions, chuck them away. So those are really useful for breaking up answer sets as well. Alrighty, what time is it? Oh. Okay. Let's do some interactive stuff. Make you see what you think about these. All right, so this is time to critique the badly written question, or maybe wonderfully written question. What potentially is wrong with this question? Yeah, Ashley.
The answers are all super connected.
Okay.
The possible answers.
That's true, yes. Yeah, please.
They could believe in, they could get to have multiple things. So,
yeah. Right, but I mean, you are saying most, right? So what is their most? Yeah, please.
Someone might not be upset about over
That's true. And it's also kind of a leading question. It implies that you are upset with the Alberta government about something, or that you should be, and therefore, what if you're not upset with them, right? Okay. How would you rate the features and adoptions of the University of Alberta's new online learning software? Very good, good, neither good nor bad, bad, or very bad. Yes, it is a double-barreled question, right? We're asking about features and adoption, right? So like you could think that Canvas is fantastic, right? Great features, wonderful, so happy to be using it, right? I love all of the things. You should not, by the way. Having dug into it, it actually lacks many capabilities that eClass had. It probably has others that eClass didn't have, but I'm mostly discovering the ones that it doesn't have that eClass did. And I'm like, oh, I can't do this? Oh, I spent 2 hours on forums because there's no manual for this thing? Super, awesome. Literally, there's no guide. You're just like on forums where other teachers have posted how they tried to do this and it didn't work. And it's like, so how do I do it? You can't. Oh, well, that would have saved me a lot of time. I would have thought of a workaround by now. But right, you could love the features and hate the fact that the U of A decided to roll it out over 2 years, right? So, double-barreled question. Very, very good. I mean, bad. Very bad. Don't do double-barreled questions. Sorry. How many times did you eat eggs last year? Yeah, what's wrong with this? Yeah, please. Yeah, obviously, if you don't eat eggs, there's no zero, so that is a problem. Yeah, please. Way too big of a time frame, right? Like, I mean, how would you even begin to answer this question, right? Like, I guess I eat eggs twice a week, except, that vegan phase I had from January 1st to January 3rd. So I didn't eat, no, that's a very long vegan phase. Obviously it's not answerable, right? Also this, I will say, this scale is ridiculous, right? It's like 1 to 10, okay. 10 to 20, okay. 21 to 30, and then just more than 30. I almost guarantee everyone would pick D, right? Like everyone would just be like, yeah, it's probably more than 30 times. Like if you ate eggs once a week, it would be more than 30 times, right? So it's a terrible scale. By the way, I worked really hard on making these questions bad, and it kind of required some effort, so. Okay. So how satisfied are you with your student experience at U of A? What's wrong with this question?
There's no options for somewhat dissatisfied, but there's no room for nuance there.
Okay. So what's
Like there's no extremely dissatisfied or somewhat dissatisfied.
okay? So what does that say about these four options? Like,
You have to pick something positive.
or absolutely negative, right? Yeah, so the scale's not balanced, right? So it's the balance of the scale. Yeah, because it's like, this to me, by the way, sounds like the kind of survey U of A would send out. It's like, how satisfied are you? Extremely, very, super duper, the bestest, don't know. Like, we just don't want to hear about it. There are good people here. I'm just kidding. Okay, that's obvious. Okay. Have you ever been denied a job opportunity or promotion because of your criminal convictions? Strongly agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree. By the way, this is an actual question that a student submitted. Please. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so yes, it is double barrel, job opportunity or promotion. There is another problem with it. Yeah.
The answers don't relate to the question at all.
Okay. In what way?
Like, how can you agree that your criminal conviction, like I strongly agree that it's denied my job opportunity, but it's asking like have you ever been denied? It's not, you know what I mean?
It's kind of a yes or no question, right? Like in this, though I love Likert scales, a Likert scale doesn't really fit this question at all, right? I mean, you could say, how often have you been denied a job opportunity because of a criminal conviction? You know, always, even then it wouldn't be a great question, but like always, sometimes, you know, don't know, seldom, never, you know, but that still wouldn't be a great question. But yeah, you're right. Strong. Have you ever been denied a job opportunity or promotion because of your criminal conviction? Strongly agree. Right. It doesn't make sense. And sometimes just reading it out loud in a dramatic voice will tell you what's wrong with the question. Okay. This one's an easy one. I believe the Prime Minister is a competent and charismatic leader. What's wrong with this one? This one's less funny. Double-barreled, right? He could be competent and not charismatic. He could be charismatic and not competent. I feel like that's more likely. Can you tell what I think about our friend JT? He's a charismatic leader. Okay, yeah, it's double-barreled. Okay. Which of these would you prefer for breakfast? Surprisingly, this is also a student question. So tea and bread, coffee, oats, or cereal. What is wrong with this question? Trust me, you don't want to write bad questions because for years later, you're going to be on the board. You won't know it, but 100%. So what's wrong with this question? Yeah, please.
Probably doesn't apply to like a lot of people while they're making their own breakfast and maybe one omelet.
Yeah, like this is like the world's smallest list of choices. It's like, okay, for one, what if I want tea but not bread? Is coffee breakfast? I don't know. I drink coffee all day long. Can't you tell? You know, oats and cereal. Yeah, it's obviously like way too small. Like there's a million options that wouldn't even be on this list. It's, yeah, bizarre. I don't know who would eat tea and bread. Sounds like a very bad breakfast. Again, please don't write terrible questions. On average, how many minutes do you spend on TikTok each day? Less than 30, 30 to 60, or more than 60?
because like it's not a big enough scale.
Yeah, these are weird. Like the breakdown of this scale is very weird, right? I mean, I think for most of my students, everyone would be here. Probably some of them while they're in my classes, unfortunately. But yeah, like less than 30, there's a ton of stuff under 30, right? Like you would get zero nuance on either of these, right? Like you would want a much more granular scale. And here actually, probably what you want to do is actually, on average, how many minutes a day do you spend on TikTok? You give them a box and you have them write the exact number, right? 70 or, 45, rather than even having a scale. Because then you can get a ton of nuance and get kind of very exact figures. Okay, there is another problem with this question. Oh, by the way, that also applies to age. Some people, and some, even professional survey companies, will have you be like, what's your age? Are you between 18 and 24? And I'm like, why don't you just put a box there and they enter their exact age? It takes almost the exact same amount of time as me reading the scale and figuring out which box I fit into. And then you get the exact number. I don't know why people do that, but yeah, can you tell? I have rage when I look at bad surveys. So I've obviously been doing this too long. I just felt the need to put a line in the 7. There is another very basic problem with this question, though. Like, how would someone measure? Like, on average, there's no time scale, right? Well, I guess each day, but for how long, right? How far back should I go in there? On what scale am I measuring this? And you're kind of stretching people's memory in funny ways. Or they have to open their phone and look up and then realize, like, oh my God, I spend more time with TikTok than anything else. TikTok's dumb and I hate it. I regularly eat a nutritious breakfast. Is there anything wrong with this question? Yeah, please. Aha! Very good. What does nutritious mean? Like, this is like income, right? What does nutritious mean? Some people might think, like my children do, that Cinnamon Toast Crunch is a nutritious breakfast. It has nutrition in it, that's certainly true. But yeah, it's like, what are you counting as a nutritious breakfast? You probably would want to break this down in some way, right? Like, that follows the Canada Food Guide. No, that's wrong. I was going to tell you to eat a lot of wheat. But yeah, you might want, that includes 3 food groups or something. Like something that would get you to nutritious. That's outside of this very ambiguous word. All right. How many? Oh, that's the last one. Okay. I'm like, how many more of these do I have? I have a lot. I add some every year, and then I just forget how long this part takes. Okay. Anything wrong with this question? Ashley's not sure. She's giving me the side eyes. Like, it seems fine to me. Is this a trick question? Any thoughts? Yeah.
You can have like different opinions about different aspects of the university, like it's not really specific, it's like academic or like
Yeah.
social aspects of the university.
So it's a little overbroad. What about the options, right? What is your opinion of the University of Alberta? Very good. Does that fit when I read it out loud? No? Like, how would you answer this? Like, my opinion of the University of Alberta is neutral. Right? So obviously the scale doesn't really make sense. At first glance though, and this is where sometimes you see questions written like this, it almost looks like it makes sense, like it should work, until you read it aloud. You read the question with your answer, right? What is your opinion of the University of Alberta? Very good! I have a very good opinion. I love my opinion of the University of Alberta. I think my opinion is the best opinion out there. The best, right? So obviously, you have to be careful with some of that, because sometimes, like, honestly, you're using like what seems like a very reasonable scale, and it does But when you actually think about it for a sec, it's not a great, you could phrase the question better and then use a better answer set. Yeah, please.
So to fix that, would you be more specific on what you're asking, or would you put like a text box for people to just say?
So what I would do, I would take out, I would actually just rewrite it completely. It's terrible. Again, you want to probably nuance it, but you could have something like, I have a very good opinion of I think the University of Alberta is a quality educational institution. Strongly agree to strongly disagree, right? Like, I would say, having a question, less good than having a statement and a Likert scale. And then obviously, the University of Alberta offers quality academic opportunities. We strongly agree, strongly disagree, right? The University of Alberta, is located on a beautiful piece of land. Strongly agree to strongly disagree. The engineers at the University of Alberta get all the benefits. Strongly agree to strongly disagree. The Tory building should have been torn down 50 years ago. Is it me, or is it designed to get first-year students hopelessly lost? It's like, I keep wondering if there's like a minotaur in here that's just gonna eat someone. It's like, your class is in TB 001-D. Good luck finding that. And then the number on the door is like TB 1. Like, completely different. It doesn't have the zeros. I don't know why. Anyway, that's my favorite thing about September, is guiding hapless undergraduates through the Tory building. And they're like, I've been wandering around looking for BW for 4 hours. I forgot my name. It's like, oh, Breezeway, right over there. Sorry. That's my favorite thing about the Tory, being in the Tory building all the time, is just like, you're like, I sense you're in trouble. All right, I love these. Okay, one last thing. We could do vignettes. Vignette questions. Vignette questions are great. So vignette questions are usually questions that tell a little bit of a story, right? They give people, one or more scenarios and ask them how they would respond, right? So, you are a professor at the University of Alberta in the first week. Students are hopelessly lost, attempting to find their classroom in the Tory building. What would you recommend the university do in the future? A, better signage. B, burn it down. C, have a guide dog that takes people to their classroom. Right. Actually, that sounds like a business model. So you could, obviously I'm being silly now because I'm in a silly mood after all those questions. And it's Friday. So it can be really useful a little bit for distancing people from the respondent, right? So this creates a little bit of distance between them and their actual life. And it might be, it causes people to pause and think, like, what would I do in this circumstance, right? You don't want it to be too, vignettes should be really short. You don't want to one of the problems that sometimes people have with vignettes is they're like, in the beginning. It's like, oh God, it's going to be a long vignette question, isn't it? So typically pretty short scenarios, right? Like, political research does this a bit. Like, you're faced with these two candidates offering these two positions. Which one would you vote for, right? Sometimes you want to do that to take it out of the villain Justin Trudeau is offering this terrible policy. Do you like it? It's more like, hey, this is, this government in Slovenia is designing an online rights bill or an online information governance bill that would do these following things, right? What are your feelings about this, right? So the vignette would take it out of Canada, defamiliarize it, separate it from someone's pre-existing political beliefs, and give you a little bit more Canada response, something where people could evaluate the merits of, say, a policy or a position outside of their own biases. So vignette questions can be really useful for that. Okay. Yeah, the weakness. How people say they would act in a situation might be different from how they act, right? I've distanced you now from your your policy positions by taking it to the imaginary country of Potsylvania. By the way, that's the fictional country where the villains come from in Rocky and Bullwinkle, if you're wondering. Always the fictional country of choice, Potsylvania. But in the real world, right, they would just be like, F Trudeau, right? Right? Because that's how people actually think. So it could be useful in evaluating how popular a policy might be if, the particular party that was proposing it wasn't who they are and people didn't know anything about them. But in real life, like, I'm 100% voting against that person because I hate that guy, right? Is how a lot of people are going to be. So yeah, it can be an interesting piece of information or an interesting starting point for future research. But yeah, they do have their limitations. Also, people tend to write way too long of vignette questions, and then people get confused and bored and quit your survey. So, all right, we're making progress. I used all my time like a good boy. All right, we'll see you on Monday, and we're moving towards finishing up this at some point. Oh my God, I still have so many slides. So many slides. All right, we'll get through it eventually. I promise.